Good evening. My name is Terrence Carroll, and I am chair of the King County Districting Committee. This is July 7th, 2011, and I'd like to welcome you to the Highline Community College and to a public meeting that we are having here tonight. I'd let you know that our hearing tonight is being recorded by King County Television on cable channel 22. And will be rebroadcast, as I understand it, sometime this coming weekend on several occasions. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize that we do have several public officials here. I know that Councilmember Julia Patterson is here. Would you raise your hand? Councilmember Patterson, thank you for being here tonight. We also have Lisa Jensen, who is back there and is a council member from the city of Newcastle. And thank you, Lisa. And certainly last but not least is Dennis Higgins. Dennis, where are you? Council member from the city of Kent. Thank you as well. What I'd like to start with is a little bit of background about our committee, and then we're going to hear from our expert, John Slosher, on the maps that have been developed so far, and then most importantly, we'll hear from those of you who'd like to talk with us tonight. I suspect most of you already know that the laws require that every 10 years, every time following a census, that there be a redistricting. And the committee that you see in front of you, with the exception, I might add, of one of our members that I'll get to in a moment, is the King County Council District group that's been selected to take a look at the King County Council 9 districts that are currently divided in the county. You should also know that probably about 7 years ago, there were 13 council members, and by public vote, those were reduced to 9. Therefore, the districts were reduced to 9, but they used the 2000 census in order to make the divisions that are currently in play. Our county, which is very extensive in the size of several states, as you may know, grew by 11% between 2000 and 2010, but the districts grew differently, and that might be expected. You're in District 5, and there certainly was growth in District 5, but there was also growth in other districts, especially those on the eastern side of the county. In particular, I believe District 3 experienced growth of 27% of it. So we have to, and part of our challenge is to balance that growth, because under the law, we have certain requirements that I'm going to get to in a minute in terms of our work, and we'll talk about that. But first of all, I want to introduce Sally Poliak to my right, John Jensen to my left, and Rod Dembowski to my left as well as my colleagues here. Sally Nelson, who actually is from this area, is not here tonight. She had an injury today and had to go to the emergency room and was advised for good reason not to be here, but I know that in spirit she's here, and also will be able to, as you, if you're interested in watching on the county channel, the proceedings here today. My colleagues and I, including Sally Nelson, are here as volunteers, just as those of you who are not public officials are here as volunteers as well. There is another committee that you may have heard about that's also looking at the legislative districts. That's not us. That's a separate committee that's doing that work and is looking at statewide legislative districts. But the law that we have to follow is one that's evolved over time. There have been Supreme Court decisions, the most famous of which is Baker versus Carr, which you're all familiar with when you hear the phrase one person, one vote. There's also been voting rights acts in our country, and also the state and local governments have also given us guidelines for our work. They're general guidelines, but I think they're important for you to know because they're the rules that we have to follow. And the districts that we have to look at are to be compact, contiguous, and composed of economic and geographic units. Also, the law is specific in our state that population data may not be used for purposes of favoring or disfavoring any racial group or political party. We're also required to consider many other factors, including city boundaries, natural features, and communities of interest. Recognizing there are 39 different municipalities in King County, the lines have to be drawn somewhere, but those are the general guidelines that we have to follow. Before we came up with the 4 maps that are in front of us tonight, we had several public meetings at which we also heard input. And the protocols that we decided upon said that let's develop some, after hearing from the public testimony, some potential district divisions. Some of them are ones that you have to really look at to see, but they're important certainly to the communities that are represented thereon, representing some differences that may have existed before. Please appreciate also that the 4 plans that we're going to hear more about in a minute or two from our expert, as the committee continues its work, we're not bound by any of those maps, but I think it's obvious that we came up with them as prototypes and they'll be our templates. But the final product will be developed by us. We have one more public meeting, and although our deadline for coming up with the final plan is January of 2012, we intend, I think, a consensus to beat that and to try to have by October something final. After we develop our final plan, we'll also have a public meeting for input into it. But once that plan, whenever that date is, once we decide on it, that's it. The only way it changes is subject to legal challenge. So this work that we're trying to do is to follow the broad guidelines that the law has, to do the best we can to come up with something that meets the responsibilities that we have and is fair to all the citizens. Now, we also have a website, and that is kingcounty.gov/districting, kingcounty.gov/districting. And I'm saying that because this doesn't have to be the only input that you give to us. You can follow the guidelines that we're using, the things that we're developing and talking about in our meetings, as well as additional input from yourselves, if you're interested, from that website. Now, we also had to hire our own expert, and John Slosher is here. And we've done this in other meetings where he goes into a little more detail with the maps that we have so you can understand better some of the differences that the 4 maps present. So John, if you could step forward here and spend a few minutes with it, with us, we'll have that, and then we'll hear from you.
Thank you very much. So I want to talk a little bit about the landscape of King County as it applies to districting and the process before the committee. So what we've been seeing here on screen in front of you is a set of the current district boundaries for King County. Just point out a couple things about it, and then what we'll do is look at some specific sub-areas of the county that have been of particular concern to the committee so far and have shown up in testimony before the committee. Then we'll go through each one of the plans, highlighting some important differences between and among them, both between the various 4 plans, draft plans, and also contrasting them against the current boundaries. We'll focus mostly on the areas of the plans that are here in the southern part of the county and in consideration of the location of our public meeting tonight. Okay, so the current plan, as you can see, puts, I'll just point out a couple highlights. The colored areas are city areas, city incorporated place areas. The dark green lines, sort of green on this screen, are the current district boundaries. District 8 does include Vashon Island in the current plan, and you can see Mercer Island is part of District 6 in the current plan. The boundaries do seem to, in some general way, address the city incorporated place boundaries. That's not an exact match. Of course, some cities have changed since these boundaries were drawn. A classic example would be Kirkland up here to the north, which recently had an annexation of a very substantial set of neighborhoods. Okay, so that's the current plan. Let's look at some areas of concern. Well, maybe fall back just a little bit. In more broad terms, let's think about how these are balanced based on the 2005 district boundaries. There were, in the 2005 process, as Judge Carroll mentioned, there were, the population was balanced based on the year 2000 census. And across the 9 districts, it came to about 192, 193,000 per district, fairly flat line there. Of course, as mentioned, these areas have grown at different rates. And now if we look at the 2010 population by district in chart form, you can see there are substantial differences. What are the 2 outliers there in terms of the height of the bars? Well, it's District 3 and District 9, which is not all that surprising when you think about growth to the eastern section of the county, not just in the northern part of the county, but also here in the more southern area of the county. I did a little analysis of just how much population had shifted to the east between the year 2000 and the year 2010. And it turns out that the geographic center of the county with respect to population, based on the year 2000 census, was, let's see if I can get this pointer to work, was right here offshore between Mercer Island and the city of Seattle in this general vicinity here, within the water, but several hundred yards offshore. For 2010, that geographic center, again with respect to population, shifted onshore on Mercer Island, but really not a lot, about 1/3 of a mile, which is really a reflection of the fact that the density of the county is very much to the west. Was before, is now. But 1/3 of a mile is still a lot of people. In fact, if you look at it as an average per block, city block or census block, which is the unit of analysis that we've typically used, the average number of people in a census block is roughly 80, 85. You move 3 or 4 blocks, much less the 1/3 of a mile, you're really encompassing quite a lot of people. And certainly in density areas where there are a lot of apartments, in a single block, you could have hundreds, in some cases even thousands of people. So all these little adjustments along the border may look small on the map, but they can be significant. Let's look at some areas that have been brought to the attention of the committee, both in public testimony and I think in the committee's deliberations. These are not a reflection of the committee's opinion. These are my opinion and nothing more. One of the statements that we've heard pretty repeatedly is that some of the small cities, I'm not talking about Seattle, I'm not talking about Bellevue, I'm not talking about the mega cities of our county, and it's more than Seattle, isn't it? We have some very significantly sized cities in this county. But some of the smaller cities, such as this set of wonderful cities here to the south, Enumclaw, Black Diamond, Covington, Maple Valley, that there's a lot of collaboration between and among them, and we've heard testimony that said, see what you can do to keep that collaboration going. So that's a group of cities here in the south that's been brought up several times. Well, let's look over here around maybe the vicinity of where we're meeting tonight. Here in the vicinity of SeaTac, Burien, Normandy Park, Des Moines, city of SeaTac proper. A whole set of cities that also collaborate a lot, and we've heard testimony from many people from those areas saying that there are common interests. Moving up a little bit more to the north, towards the south end of Lake Washington, here between Renton and the city of Seattle. Drawn a circle around it. This is an area that's unincorporated. It's not in any city, and it's between Renton and the city of Seattle. Some people think of it as the Skyline area, Skyway, big difference. Skyway potential annexation area. It's not been annexed. It's gone to the vote in the past, probably will go to a vote in the future, but that's been of interest to quite a number of people, saying it's currently bisected. It's half in District 2, half in District 5. We should think about whether it should be bisected in the future. Another group of cities to the north, just touching on it briefly, 2 other groups of cities. One is the area of small cities in the vicinity of the Snoqualmie Valley. This is an area that includes, for example, Falls City and Carnation and Duval. Cities that sort of follow the I-90 corridor there, get into some of the rural areas slightly north of I-90. They're all in District 3 pretty much now, and there's been testimony about the level of collaboration, cooperation among those cities. Also to the far north, the North Shore cities, Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, Bothell, Kenmore, and so on. So those have been topics that have been brought before the committee, and you maybe have influenced some of the drafts that we're going to see. So let's turn now to the drafts themselves. There are, as was mentioned, there are 4 different drafts, very much drafts. And I wanted to highlight in a different way now something that shows the areas in which these drafts are really different. So I'm not comparing now to the testimony that was received, but really comparing the drafts themselves. Where are these drafts different? So as we go through them, you can maybe focus your attention on the areas where they're different from each other. Well, certainly in the area of SeaTac and the airport cities, there are significant differences. So keep an eye on that. Here's that Skyway area in the Renton and Seattle vicinity, down at the south end of Lake Union. Mercer Island, one of the drafts puts Mercer Island in a different district, not in District 6, but aligns it with District 2. It becomes part of District 2. Over here in the Issaquah area, Issaquah totally in District 3 right now, but in one of the drafts, it moves into District 6. Another draft, it gets split into 2 pieces and is represented by 2 council members. And one of the drafts, it stays in the current district. This area here in northern Seattle won't cover the north end of the county too much, but just briefly, north part of District 2, that line between District 2 and District 1 shifts around in the different drafts. Keep an eye on that. And over here, more to the west, between District 1 and District 4, District 4 currently stops just south of the Seattle northern border at 145th. Well, in draft or 2, it extends north to the county line. And those are areas to keep an eye on as we compare the 4 drafts. Let's shift to those 4 drafts. We'll go from 1 to 4. There's no priority order. Those are just numeric references. We'll go one at a time, and again, highlight some things that are interesting or different for each draft, one at a time. So this is draft map 1, which is not showing everything I thought I'd see. Did everyone get handouts? Okay. I think among them is also a map that shows the current districts. So if we look at draft map 1, you might want to line that up with the current districts. You'd be able to go back and forth, sort of A and B, and find the differences between them. So draft map 1, what's different about this one? Well, down here in the south, you'll see District 5 now encompasses Normandy Park and half of Burien. So that's change. I'm going to try and get this map to show a little bit more so we can compare these more easily. Okay. We'll go to something else here. That's a little bit better. Also in the south part of the county, if you look at the Renton area, this area of the potential annexation area between Renton and the city of Seattle, that's now fully within an extended District 2. District 2 in this draft continues south from the city of Seattle and incorporates half of the city of Renton. Moving a little bit north, District 8 is extended up here to include all of the downtown area, the central business district in any case. That previously was part of District 1. Now it's moved to District 8. And over here in the Issaquah area, Issaquah is now split with half of it in District 3 and half in District 9. That's Plan 1, draft Plan 1. Issaquah previously, in the current map, is entirely in District 3, isn't it? Okay, let's shift to Plan 2. Probably the most prominent feature of this plan is that this is the plan that moves Mercer Island from District 6 and makes it part of District 2. That adds quite a lot of population to District 2. District 2 then stops a little bit further north at the south end, does not include any of that potential annexation area, leaving it entirely to District 5, which now includes a bigger share of Renton. Well, close to home, District 8 here has expanded to the south quite a bit. You can see the green line barely, just it cuts off the top end of SeaTac in the old map boundaries. Under this plan, District 8 now includes a much larger portion of the city of SeaTac, bigger chunk of Tukwila, and basically expands more into the area of town where we are meeting tonight. With respect to Issaquah, District 6, well, it lost Mercer Island. It has to pick up some population somewhere. It's like chasing a bubble around under a tablecloth or a piece of paper. District 6 here includes all of Issaquah. That was previously in District 3, wasn't it? Well, now it's moved entirely into District 6. And we'll leave off discussion of the areas to the north for this time, although you're welcome to ask questions later. Let's move to plan number 3. Again, starting in the south. Shift in the boundary to the south, down by District 9, where it connects or is adjacent to District 7. Shifting that boundary over a little bit to the west, taking a little bit more of Kent, and now following the Kent-Black Diamond Road as a prominent dividing line. A few changes here in the vicinity of the airport cities, if you will. District 2, in particular, is extended toward the airport and toward Renton, including all of that potential annexation area. Just a few boundary changes affecting SeaTac and Tukwila, primarily moving more of Tukwila and SeaTac into District 5. And then District 2, which has always been a fairly tall and narrow district. In this plan, it's broadened in an east-west direction. It includes more of Capitol Hill and more of Beacon Hill in an east-west direction. Well, what's happening with Issaquah in this plan? Well, it's, District 6 is shifted a little bit south of the I-90 corridor from where it currently is, but in this plan, Issaquah still is in District 3. So District 3 still contains Issaquah. One more draft, district plan number 4. Not a lot of change here on the southern edge of the county. These boundaries, I think, in all 4 plans, north-south boundary, tend to align themselves just a little bit to the west of the Enumclaw, Covington, Black Diamond area. Same is true of this plan. District 8 under this plan does go further south, breaks between 5 and 8 there at South 188th, taking in more of SeaTac, but probably not as much population as it looks because much of that is runway and other aspects of the airport. This plan, like all the other plans, does put the West Hill Skyway potential annexation area in a single district entirely. None of the plans split it anymore. In this case, it's added to District 5. And this plan also leaves Issaquah entirely in District 3, just to the north. So each plan is different. Each one has a particularly distinctive attribute, I think. If you've followed what I've been trying to focus on, I've tried to point out those things. At the same time, if you line them all up together, and I've done this just out of curiosity, stack all 4 plans together, and what's most striking is how common they are, and really how little change each of them involves. The lines are shifting. You can shift a block and affect the lives of 85 voters, 85 residents, sometimes 1,000 residents just by shifting a block. But by and large, the changes are fairly modest, and there are a lot of commonalities between and among these plans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for that. By the way, in the past, we have permitted, and certainly tonight, if there's any questions of clarification that anyone has of John in terms of his presentation, those certainly are welcomed and permitted if anybody has any questions. Sure. Could you speak to, just quickly identify yourself and speak right to the mic there, ma'am. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Emily Willoughby. I live in Tukwila. I was just wondering, when you put the plan together, did you start with the cities as they currently exist and then, like add on by city or by unincorporated area to try and get to the population number you were looking at? I live in Tukwila. My city split in all 4. And I noticed that some of the other cities, they have the same problem.
You're in a hard spot in Tukwila. You're right at the crossroads, aren't you? And I think the same is true of Kent. I can't speak for the whole committee. This was a group effort, and different plans were put together by different members of the committee. But I think by and large, people started with the lines as they are and tried to solve specific problems problems like, do we really want to split the potential annexation area? Problems like, we are 30,000 people too heavyweight in District 3. So you start with a problem, and it's like starting a ball going downhill. All of a sudden it creates a problem in the adjacent district. You start making it a smaller and smaller problem and winnowing it out. I do feel like the committee's made a really solid effort to respect city boundaries where they can. Obviously, some cities are really huge, and they're not all going to fit in a single boundary. There's been a lot of discussion about not trying to balkanize a little city by chopping it into 59 different pieces, but not always possible to be perfect on that. So.
You know, my colleagues, Ms. Willoughby, also want to comment on that, but I think I went over just briefly some of the requirements that we have, and it is probably an impossibility to honor the boundaries of every city because there's 39 within the district, and the lines have to be drawn somewhere, as you know. We have also heard from cities that prefer to be in 2 districts and some that don't. I mean, they really vary. You'd be surprised. This is a regional government, so there are different issues, but that's some of the input that we've gotten as well.
I recognize that Tukwila was split in 2
yes.
going in, but I just was wondering how much of an emphasis there was in trying to keep any given, or looking at where the cities are and then adding on so that you can keep, I mean, my ledge district, I've got 3 different congressional, you know, it's just,
yeah.
It'd be nice if I could say, I live here and this is who represents me.
Yeah.
Instead of, well, if I lived a half block over, it would be somebody else, and, you know, it's just.
Yeah, and I appreciate it, and that's good input for us to hear, and we have heard that, and I know that you appreciate, sometimes geographic, as John said, your location almost invites it. Renton traditionally has also been very divided into districts depending on the level of government. But in answer to your question, we do and did try to honor the municipal boundaries. In fact, it's mentioned in the law to the extent that you can, but I think you can appreciate it isn't a requirement, and it would be an impossibility if we had to. So this is why we're having these meetings. It's good input to hear, and I think you can appreciate you're not the only person that feels the way you do. There are others that do. Yes. Yes. Any other questions? Come forward, please, if you could.
Hi, Bob Lelliger from the West Hill of Kent.
Yes.
My question, and you had spoken about it, was annexation areas. King County is trying to divest themselves of the expensive annexation areas within the county, unincorporated areas. My backyard happens to fall within one of these areas on the West Hill of Kent, a little small pocket area that a couple of the neighbors have resisted incorporation for a few years. But there are at least probably 3 unincorporated areas in District Number 5, and it would be nice to, you know, I agree with the City of Kent, and I would like to see them incorporated. And I just wondered how that factor was taken into the redistricting.
I don't think, and perhaps my colleagues could weigh in on this, that really isn't something that we're looking at, although we know that Kirkland has recently annexed a significant area. We've tried to look at that. It's pretty hard to anticipate what will be annexed and what won't be. I think if you look at the votes in the last decade or 2, it's somewhat unpredictable. So it's a factor, but it's a little bit like the other question the question we just had in terms of where do you draw the lines. And I would urge you, if you're really interested in this, I think our staff has put together not only the maps, but on the other side is a breakdown of incorporated and unincorporated. And there is a large population of King County that is not in an urban area. But I think you can appreciate that if you look at the maps, certainly on the east side, most of the unincorporated areas are probably on that side and then to the south. I think the maps that are currently in existence tried to honor that as best they could. We're looking at it, we're taking another look at it. But if the question is, and I'm not exactly sure of it, but if it is to try to get those areas anticipating where the incorporation is going to be, I don't think we have specifically looked at that, but I don't know if anybody has other input on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we haven't specifically gone through a list of PAAs or unincorporated areas near the cities, but what I would say is the committee is made up of people from all over the county, and we have experience or a knowledge of various parts of the county. So we start with that, and that gives us our egocentric view of what might be important, but it's this public input and the input from the council members as far as areas that might be our potential annexation areas. And once it's been mentioned at public comment in a specific area, it's something that we're aware of, and that's really the best way because it's a big county.
Right. And as you know, Kent did incorporate Panther Lake this last July, so that's another big chunk which pushed the city of Kent into 6th place for the sizes of cities in the state.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I might just add
Yes.
one more comment. I know I've worked with John on this, but generally, you're on the west hill of Kent. I think all of you, in all of the options, at least now or under consideration, you're in District 5. And I don't know that there's no map that proposes splitting those. But in drawing these maps, we have tried generally to look where there are potential annexation areas, which are often to the east of the suburban cities, to anticipate where possible in drawing the lines to use those PAA boundaries, if not the municipal boundaries. So we're looking at that to try and plan ahead. We can't always do it, or haven't always been able to do it because of the way the population is, but it's on the mind of the members. Thanks.
Just one more comment on what Emily had brought up about Tukwila, you know, and maybe to show our knowledge of the county and the different cities. I mean, I live in Newcastle. I was born and raised in the PAA that we're talking about in between Seattle and Renton. And Tukwila, I know, you know, last time I heard real numbers, the population is up to I think 19,000 now. But I remember when it was about 14.5 residents, but there were 52,000 people a day that worked there. So it's a very different community than some. In Newcastle, we have 10,000 residents and about 500 people work there. So Tukwila is a very dynamic 19,000 population compared to other areas. But you also have these natural and man-made barriers like the two main freeways in the city, 405 and I-5, and incredible industrial or commercial areas too that are kind of ripe for cutting.
Any other questions of John or anything that comes to mind before we begin? Okay. I might add that I think it really does help. I appreciate Simon Fred, our very able staff member, in putting together some data that you might look at that will answer some of your questions about the incorporated and unincorporated parts of the district. We now, by the way, in introducing public officials, I neglected to indicate that we do have a state representative here, Katrina Asai. Where are you, Katrina? There you are. And we missed you before, and we were introducing others. Thank you also for attending here tonight. The sign-up list starts with Don, is it Ricks, R-I-C-K-S? Don Ricks? There you are. Will you step over here and talk to us? And it appears that you're from Des Moines. Is that right, Don? Okay.
And Don, Mr. Chair,
That's right. You have I remember. I believe it was over in Kenmore. Yes. Kent. Okay.
I'm happiest with the number one because you kept Normandy Park in. However, I'm concerned about the way you've put these together. It's sort of like you took a view from 30,000 feet and just look down and say, oh, we ought to put this here and put this there. Well, we don't live at 30,000 feet. We live right in the area. And I took an old map and
Simon, can I ask you maybe to hold this for the gentleman, because we don't seem to have a place that would be convenient. If we could just, it might help in your presentation. Yeah. Thank you.
we have Normandy Park here. At the present time, we have a couple of Urian precincts in District 5. And I'm perfectly willing to see us take Normandy Park and
Let's get to a little closer to the mic, Don.
maybe
That's
you could stand
better.
over here and get
Sure.
an angle
There
shot.
we go.
That help?
There we go.
Okay, hey, there he goes. I'd be perfectly happy if we could give all of the Burien precincts to the city. And since you were concerned about keeping cities together, oh, thank you, that'll work much better. Since you were concerned about keeping cities together, I've come up with a system that I think will do the minimum. And the only one, and I'll get rocks thrown at me for this, is SeaTac, which I don't think we need to worry about cutting in half. SeaTac was the airport. And when it was formed, the city fathers that got that together said, well, if we can surround the airport, we can have all the taxes from the area. It wasn't common residence. It was a matter of finance. What I've done is drawn a line down Des Moines Memorial Drive, which makes a little hook there, and then I go across 288th. Is that right? Yeah. 188. No, I was wrong. Across 188. It's a natural boundary. It's a 4-lane highway. And the only city it's cutting in half now at this point is SeaTac. It's leaving a much more residential area to the south and apartments to the north. Most of the area up here in this area are apartments and condos that service the airport. There are some nice residences in here as well, but it's a minimum I could come up with. Then Tukwila annexed this area. It would be natural to come straight across, but Tukwila did just recently annex this since this map was made. And so I put that in as a lineup. You have the Green River defining that area. Then coming across, I go up to the top of Kent and then right straight across that way. Now, this map doesn't cover anything farther east, but we have a number of unincorporated areas in that area. And what I would like to see, and I didn't have a map big enough or proper, I would like to see this kind of a cut and give the area above here with a lot of population, and then take back area clear over into Covington. That's the next city. There is more business going on between Kent and the eastern side of Kent that one gentleman spoke to than there is between Kent and Renton. And so I would like to see you continue to give us a horizontal reading of this so that you come up with the population in that area. We had to, it cuts into District 9, which you had to get rid of 11,000 residents. And so that'll help. And if you wanted to go farther, and I'm not interested in dealing with it, but you might consider giving Enumclaw to District 7 because their distance from Renton is so far that it doesn't seem that they're in the same area of interest. And so that's my suggestion, that we cut it horizontally. Yes, I want us to see Normandy Park saved because I'll reiterate, Normandy Park and Des Moines are essentially one city with two screwed up city councils. I mean, they don't work together all the time, but they share fire districts, police services, water problems, and it's just one street that separates the two cities. So we should be in the same county district.
So just to reiterate.
Any questions?
Yeah, just to reiterate, so you'd like Normandy Park, Des Moines, all of Kent, and all of Covington. Is that? And then Tukwila goes into
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. And so no Renton. Then you would.
No, we're not looking to cut any of the other cities up here. We're trying to leave them alone.
Right. That's fine. I just wanted to see. I'm interested in which communities you think should go together, and so I just want to validate what I'm hearing and make sure it's.
Well, it's an improvement over what you have, cutting Tukwila and some of the other cities in half.
Yep. No, I just wanted a clarification just to make sure I heard you correctly. That's all.
John, you know, could you reduce that to a smaller, something that would be more manageable for us? It would be helpful. If you could reduce it to one page, if you could.
Oh, yes, I could do that from the existing maps.
Okay, that would be helpful.
This was the only one I found. It's out of date.
It's
I also
okay.
testified before the Legislative and Governmental Committee and indicating that in their wisdom, they should make a more horizontal situation. We are suburban. And what you're doing to Normandy Park by putting it in with the city of Seattle is too much Seattle-centric thinking that those people are not dealing with.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Sure. And maybe if you want, so for people here, Don, maybe explain what you did just real quick. Just explain to people. Thank you. That was a good suggestion.
Without seeing the map. You want to hold it with both hands so I can, yeah, okay. I want to see Normandy Park saved because there's only one street here separating Des Moines and Normandy Park. We do share police services and a number of things, water districts. This cuts SeaTac in half. It comes down and gives Burien all of its own district. Right now, about 4 of these precincts are in the 5th district, or the 33rd. This is a 33rd district map. It makes sense. I come down Des Moines Memorial Drive, then go directly east on 188th, which is a 4-lane highway. And it stops here at the I-5 location, and you have to do some jiggling around here. This is now has been annexed by Tukwila. That's the latest acquisition. You could draw the line across, but to keep the cities together, I'm showing this kind of a thing. This is the Green River here. And then I come over, and I come up to the top of Kent, and my proposal is just keep going east, the top of Kent. Leaves Renton completely isolated. You can work with that however you want if you're going to cut it, but this keeps some of the cities together as much as possible. We have unincorporated areas over here that we would be moving into, and we would take Covington probably to make our bean counter over there, the little dot counter. You didn't show that crazy map with all the dots, did you? You don't have that one tonight. Oh, you ought to show them that map. But at least we can put the dots where they belong, and we would have people that have a common interest across the whole area. I had hoped someone from the City Council of Kent would be here tonight. I was promised, oh, hi, different guy. There was someone else I was told was going to be here. At any rate, I hope this meets your approval. I've discussed this with a number of council members.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for that. Don, I want you to summarize. Are you done? Okay. Thank you very much for that additional presentation. You know, I might mention also we have Councilmember Larry Phillips is here. Councilmember Phillips, thank you for coming here tonight for this meeting. Okay. Does anybody else wish, there are others here, does anybody else wish to present any kind of testimony here tonight based either on what you've heard or any comments or further questions? Please step forward if you want to add comment.
Councilmember Patterson.
Yes, I recognize her.
I think she.
Councilmember Patterson, did you want to say something?
Thank you. I would just like to suggest when I addressed you previously, I hadn't thought too much about saying this, but I think it is really important to keep that Skyway neighborhood in with Renton because it's a potential annexation area for Renton. So I know they're struggling trying to figure out how to get that piece annexed, but anything that we can do when we draw those political boundaries to keep those two pieces together, I think is important. And then I think there is some merit to the idea, all those little cities to the south, you know, Burien, SeaTac, Normandy Park, Des Moines, it's so chopped up in there that they don't have much of a voice regionally. I think that some thought should be given to whether or not it makes sense to keep them in one area as much as possible so that they have one strong voice. I don't know what the cities themselves are asking for. I know the city of Renton asked to be split. The mayor of Renton did. I don't know that any of those little cities up in the southwestern part have expressed an opinion about that. But please correct me if you think I'm wrong about this. I think if you are a big city, being split makes sense because there's enough of a population that they can have a political impact. But if you are a little city being split, you essentially could be diffusing yourself so much that you don't have much of a voice at all. So that's what I was thinking about, those little cities, trying to keep those, like in map number, I'm not advocating for map 1. I know that these lines are going to change, but in map 1 you do more or less keep them together. Mm-hmm. Those are my thoughts tonight.
Well, thank you for that input. And as I was listening to Don, I think there were good suggestions, and Councilmember Patterson as well. Please appreciate that when you make a change in one district, it affects everything. In other words, you run into, if you ever been involved with maps and whatever, you know this, you affect the demographics of other regions as well. So just be aware of that. These are good and valuable suggestions, but making changes here causes us to make a change literally everywhere to make the adjustments. I know Councilmember Phillips is here. Did you indicate you wanted to say something as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Commission. I here actually speak to a slightly different issue, and I don't want to take the time of members of the audience who are here to speak to issues related to South County and their district boundaries. I wasn't able to attend the meeting in Shoreline, principally because I had a direct conflict that night. I just had a quick comment to make, but again, I don't want to be intruding on those who may have other comments. So
that's fine. You know, now we don't have anybody else signed up to talk, so okay.
I'll just take a quick moment. And I did have the good fortune of being in the first 2 years on the county council to represent Shoreline in what was a split district at that time. Audrey Gruger and I represented the community. I was living in the 4th Council District from the Magnolia community. Won my election, campaigned heavily up there, but over the 2 years that I was there and getting to know folks well, there was a very strong perception and also a sense, maybe more symbolic than anything else, but it was strongly felt that Shoreline wanted to have one representative. When we redistricted, that is what came to pass. Shortly after that, Shoreline moved for an incorporation. I hope that wasn't because of my representation there for 2 years. But the sense of it was, among many residents, a very strong concern about their school district and their orientation to the northern cities across the northern part of Lake Washington. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't know that it's changed a lot over time, but the orientation of Shoreline is really across that northern boundary and not really to the southern part of the district. And I don't know if others have spoken to that, but that is still a very strong sense of folks living there. One of the concerns about a split district in Shoreline, I'll just conclude with this thought, is they may end up with 2 representatives living in the city of Seattle but representing Shoreline simply because of how the districts lay out from an electoral perspective. So I just wanted to raise that and share that with you from someone who represented the district and had spent quite a bit of time there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission.
Thank you for those comments. It's you know, all this input is valuable to us. And I want to mention also that perhaps I missed him, but Dan Caldwell, where are you? Dan? There you are. And Dan is a Des Moines council member, as I understand it. And I really, really appreciate the council members and the other public officials for coming here tonight. I think it's very valuable, and the people are well represented by that, and we really appreciate your attendance here. Again, is there anyone who has, you know, who wants to say anything, public official or not, but come forward? And this is Dennis Higgins, who's a council member from Kent. Mr. Higgins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and the Commission and Mr. Schlosser. I think you guys have the greatest job in the world. I'm speaking as a GIS professional in my day job. My colleagues and I have not spoken about this as much as I would prefer, but I will express, an understanding that Kent is of a size that we're not going to fit into one district. We don't currently. We're a combination of 5, 9, and 7, to a much lesser extent 7. I guess I would just encourage you not to balkanize up the city as much as is possible. We currently have all 3 of those districts. We're very much centered on District 5 with Julia, but we do receive good feedback and input from District 9 and District 7. Ideally, if I had my druthers, I'd try to limit it to 2 districts, but I would just encourage you not to balkanize it to the degree that you're able.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
You sure can.
Councilmember Higgins, the southern border of District 5 as it exists today follows the river there, but there is some of the city of Kent that jumps over the river. Right. Is there anything in particular in drawing lines in that area that we ought to know as a committee?
That would be the southern part of what we call our West Hill. If you could pan down there, the people there are of a similar makeup. I think drawing the line as it currently is on Reeth Road made sense. Ideally, all those folks would be in one district or the other. The boundaries as they are now, the agricultural finger that kind of points out at the bottom there's hardly anybody who lives there. There are a lot more people in that Lake Fenwick area just east of Reeth Road, and they have much more in common with the people on the other side of Reeth Road. If those people could be kept in the same district, I think that makes sense.
Can I ask a follow-up question sort of to what Don spoke about earlier, the relationship between Kent and Covington and how strong that is, and where, if you were to draw a line, would you draw it if you had to cut the city up in that regard?
I could get real selfish and say I really like that line on 132nd because I live on 129th. But I'm not going to say that. I just don't see how demographically you're going to be able to switch. District 9 is going to have to come through there somewhere. And whether it's the Kent city limits or 132nd or 124th, we're going to have some of District 9 in there, and we've worked well with Reagan Dunn's office, and I don't have a big problem with that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, we have a couple hands, and we've not heard from you, and then there's another person in the back. Sir, you're Mr. Willoughby, I think.
Yeah, my name is Paul Willoughby, and I live in the city of Tukwila. And one of the things I want you to keep in mind is that the city of Tukwila has more common interest with the valley cities than with the Highline cities. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of commerce and everything that goes with that.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Katie Hanzelli. I live on Kent East Hill. I just have a couple comments about the south end. I agree with Mr. Ricks that some of the redistricting or rebounding that he suggested would work out very well. And as an East Hill resident, I'd like to say that I have much more in common with the people in Covington than I do with the people on West Hill Kent. And I would like to see a districting that incorporates that. Right now, I feel like I'm talking to people who consider themselves Kent resident, but they're in a completely different district across 132nd, and it's like, oh, we're not supposed to be friends? I know that seems kind of trite, but that's almost the way it feels. The other comments I'd like to make are in regard to Issaquah. And I have family and friends in Issaquah, and when I looked at the drafts that were proposed, I did a little opinion seeking from those people. And I'd like to share with you just briefly what I heard. Opinion number one, please do not split Issaquah. The people there are all of a community, both north and south of the freeway there. You split them up, it's going to do like what I feel like has been done with us in Covington. They are all one community. Point number two, they believe they have more in common, Sammamish and Issaquah, with each other than they do with other communities to the north, south, or west. Map number 2 has them in District 6, which associates them with North Bellevue and Kirkland, which in terms of community interest and contiguousness just made a whole lot of eyebrows rise. They just kind of went, what? It doesn't make any sense to them that they would be associated with someone who's completely kitty corner, in a manner of speaking, across the county. And they would like to stay Sammamish, Issaquah, kind of all of a group. And that's that. Thank you for your time, and I realize that you can't please all the people all the time, but I think if you rethink some of the things that have been presented, you could please most of the people most of the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Okay, anybody else? All right. I don't know if any of my colleagues have anything they want to add to the discussion. John, did you want to say something?
I'd like to just comment on the ideas of splitting cities are something that I think we're learning about as we go along. I mean, obviously we know some people want to be kept together and some cities want to be split, but understanding the reasons why is, I think, more important than just knowing what they want. If you look at the cities that suggest they might want to be split, they're typically cities in the 100,000 plus range. And that means they're a city that, if they want to be split, that means they would like their 100,000 population to have influence on 2 districts. So then you have a little bit of a challenge to make that work for that city, to be an effective split. Then it needs to be done well, because at 100,000, they are about 25% of the population of 2 districts. So that means that it needs to be done very effectively for them to make that of value to them. There are areas where that will work. There are other areas where it's tough, and it starts to be more based on the influence of that city and what they'll have. But for example, using Shoreline, Mr. Phillips talked about Shoreline. One of the concerns in a city like Shoreline is that, hey, we're going to be only 13% of the population, for example, in map 1 in District 1 if they're split. Well, in some respects, they might not mind being 13% of the population if they're associated with other small cities that have common interests, or they're in a group of cities that are a community of interest as a suburban community. But if they're 13% or 15% of a district that the other 85% is Seattle, they feel very much disenfranchised because they know that their voice won't be heard in the same way. So there's the combination of the influence that the cities might like to have, also, you know, keeping communities of interest together, and then recognizing an overwhelming voice if a huge percentage or a very large percentage of the population is all in one city. So I would look, if that would lead me to a conclusion that if you look at map 1 or draft 1, I would be less comfortable with, for example, what you see in District 4 for those people in Shoreline than I would be in District 1. This is the same map, so I'm trying not to pick on anything, but that's one of the things I think we're learning, and that's why the input is so important, because there are parts of the county where we don't know about the geographic barriers. Or I am familiar with Canton. East and West Hill Kent are like, you know, two different places. So ongoing, we appreciate the public input and look forward to it.
Thank you. Rod, did you want to say anything?
I think it's important at this meeting to say that it's unfortunate we don't have Sally Nelson here tonight, but I think the community and those here tonight should know that she is doing a tremendous job as a former council member in the city of Burien in helping educate us on the committee about the communities here. I'm born in Auburn, raised in Renton. kid, spent almost every weekend over here at the old swap meet site, where it's just now Lowe's. So got some knowledge of the South County, and we all try and bring that to the table. But I thought it was worth saying that Sally Nelson is doing a tremendous job, and also to state that with respect to this line between District 5 and 8, on all of these maps, it's drawn somewhat differently. I think all of us here on the committee believe that there's more work to do there, more to know, more to learn. We have not yet, I don't think, done the due diligence we need to do on that line, and I think that those gathered here and those watching that are interested in that division should know that at least this member, and I think others of the committee, are going to dig in and learn more about what's going on there and in those communities before a final decision is made.
All right, well, good. I appreciate the comments of my colleagues, the comments that you brought to us tonight. And as you know, we've got a lot of work to do here, but, you know, keep in mind, not that we're asking for complete understanding, but appreciate that when you have districts of 214,000 people, that within that, those diversity, the districts will have diversity by the very nature of that, and they may not be completely in agreement, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It is a regional government. What county government does affects us on an individual level, but it's also a broader government, and that's part of the balance that we have to bring to this as well. And we appreciate very much. Our next meeting, by the way, is it is at Van Asselt up on Beacon Hill, and the date of that meeting is next week, if my memory's right, and forgive me for not, it's July 12th at 6:30 at Van Asselt is our next community input meeting. Thank you very much again. Unless there's something further, this meeting is adjourned.